Well, hello everybody. My name's Simon Smith, and I'm a bike fitter. This is one for the Bike Fit Massive. I do hope there's some fitters out there listening, although I know this is not a bike fitting conference and we are a fairly niche group. So let's look at our question, the question of the day. So fitting the bike to the athlete or the athlete to the bike. So this was the question I've been asked to talk over today. Now there is a simple answer to this question, but I do feel this could well be a platform that really speaks to the state of bike fitting. And what are we up to? What do we need to do to progress as an intervention? This is what I really want to explore during this presentation. So let's see what we're going to cover. So what you will hear is a bit of a State of the Nation address with a bit of history. And the reason for the history is to contextualise the conclusions that we can draw regarding bike fit. It's not a mature, scientifically based intervention when it comes to the management of the cyclist, in my opinion. So we're going to have a little bit of a peek through the fit window, and we're going to look at negotiating a transitional agreement. And you have to excuse the Brexit joke, but this is going to be anything other than ready. So who am I? Like I say, I'm a bike fitter. I'm an amateur cyclist, keen cyclist, physiotherapist. I've a real passion for clinical governance, and I'm part of the MSK Reform think tank governance work stream. I'm a passionate person-centred rehabilitator, and since I set up Cycloform 6 years ago, I've been bike fitting under that situation. So this is not me touting my CV, it's just simply me making you aware where I'm coming from, where my biases may lay. So let's have a little look at the history of things, and this is as good a place as any to start. This is the 1949 Tour de France. Fausto Coppi and Gino Bartali, and you don't need to be a bike fitter to recognise that both of these two cyclists are in very different positions. And back at this time, the position you rode your bike in was probably had a little bit to do with the position that your hero adopted. And if you were a Coppi fan, you probably had neck ache. Coaches and riders had their opinions, but there was nothing more to it than that, really. Experience and opinion. So then came the Italian Cycling Federation, CONI. They published this book. This is the sort of Bible of all things cycling, and there's a page there's a chapter rather in here about setting up the bike. So they compared the anthropomorphic features of a number of their elite athletes, compared that to their bike position, and then derived some optimum bike measurement parameters based on the measurements of their cyclists. So, as a start, this added some semblance of methodology, but anything more than a sort of fleeting glance would suggest that this is not going to work for all. It's sort of methodological equivalent of asking everybody who's 5'11" to wear a medium jumper, and I can tell you, particularly after lockdown, that doesn't really work so well. So then came the brands into the bike fitting arena. This started with the bike builders, and these are people who are sort of building bespoke frames for people, really wanting their clients to have the best outcome. They want their clients to have a bike that feels perfect for them. Sirota Cycles developed the thing at the top there, the sort of jig at the top there with the yellow saddle. This is what they call the size cycle. And this is where the world of sort of bike sizing and bike fitting become a little blurred. Essentially, this work has been carried on by them, and they've been joined in that market by companies called Retool with the sort of fancier looking jig beneath them. And behind each of these brands, there's a training package. You buy their kit, you get their training. You can do their training without buying their kit, but the two things go together. So then we've also got the bike fitting brands, specific bike fitting brands. There's a company called Fit Kit. They sort of extended on the work that was done by CONI and produced a sort of an analog system of fitting tools, old-fashioned plumb lines and goniometers, and again with a training package behind that. as well as them in the bike fitting arena, there's a company called BikeFit, and they focus very heavily on the foot pedal interface, and they've pushed this very hard. They've pushed their brand very hard, and in my mind, it's probably manipulated the sort of bike fitting arena to pay particular attention to this aspect of setup. And then you've got, you know, the fact that bike sales, you know, bike fit has always been an adjunct to bike sales. Specialized Trek giant, they've all got their foot in the bike fitting market. So, you know, at this point you can see the industry leading the way, the cycling industry leading the way, very much focused on sales, which, you know, in my mind, it's never a great place to start when it comes to an MSK intervention. You know, however, running parallel to this, we can see some leaders developing within the bike fitting industry. You know, when you hear these people speak, you know, what sets them apart is their acceptance that the interface with the client is the most important aspect of the fitting process. They all accept that individuals need individual solutions. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. It's not really my point. I'm not name checking, but I am sort of building a narrative. I want to draw a reference to sort of my world of physiotherapy. You know, we went through a very guru-led phase, and in this sort of slightly more enlightened time, when, you know, we sort of beat ourselves up with the evidence-based practice stick, it can be easy to see a sort of guru as a false prophet. But, you know, my opinion on that is that you know, actually these are the foundations with which evidence-based practice is built upon. You know, you have to have ideas to be able to research them. You have to start somewhere so you can move forward. And these are the guys with the ideas. You know, they're also aware that they're working within a profession that doesn't always live up to their own high standards. So if we draw a different comparison with the world of between the world of bike fitting and physiotherapy, I did a sort of fairly rough and ready literature search for books and academic journals published with the term bike fitting and derivatives of bike fit. And you know, you get 142 returns, you know, going back to '96. Now, you know, that's not. There wasn't a particularly huge amount of rigor behind that process, but you see that, you know, that's not that much publication going on over that period of time. You know, if you compared that maybe with knee strengthening for OA knee, or manipulation, or, you know, any other musculoskeletal intervention, you would expect a lot more returns than that. So you can see we are in a situation where we're drawing conclusions from a limited research base, and bike fitting doesn't really feel like it's sort of left its guru-focused period behind. So I'm going to mention, just to set aside, a slightly different strand of innovation that's running parallel again to this, and that's the sort of innovation within professional cycling. So there's a huge amount of effort placed on the performance side, particularly regarding aerodynamics and time trialing. You know, there's tie-ups with aerodynamic experts and professional teams. Ineos Grenadiers, the old Team Sky, they've got a link with a company called Swisside. They've 50 years of experience within Formula One. The picture there shows Filippo Ganna, who's the world time trial champion, competing in the Giro this year. And, you know, what you can see there is his TT extensions, his skis that he's got his arms on. You know, they're 3D printed to sort of perfectly fit him, to enable his body to be in as aerodynamic position as possible. You know, but innovation goes back, you know, decades. You know, there's the classic 1989 Tour, you know, where Greg LeMond, you know, is roundly assumed to have beaten Laurent Fignon on the last day time trial because of his position on the bike and his use of technology. And then you've got the sort of O'Brien-Boardman battle of the hour record in the 1990s, and then sort of more recently the Secret Squirrel Club at GB Cycling. All really pushing back the boundaries of performance. So although this is all a science-based application of bike fit, this is not really that applicable in my mind to the world of bike fitting that I and most bike fitters work within. In many areas of elite sport, there is a trickle-down effect into the amateur ranks, and in bike tech there certainly is. But in the world of bike fit, position remains something that's very specific to the individual. So let's continue to move forward with the story. Bike fitting is now starting to organise itself to improve consistency and standards. International Bike Fitting Institutes come onto the scene. It's a not-for-profit organisation that's come in part from academia and in part from those gurus that we mentioned on the previous slide. This feels like the beginning of some sort of governance for the profession. They're organising an internationally recognised accreditation scheme. However, as yet, as far as I can see, there's not really been much agreement in the standards of education and of testing of the knowledge, skills or attributes that are required to be a good bike fitter. And thus my worry is that at the moment this accreditation doesn't carry as much weight as it needs to truly drive up the standards of fitting. I would propose that we are in the infancy of knowing what good bike fitting should look like. We're in the infancy as an industry and standardising our inputs and making bike fitting less Marmite. So the profession, in my mind, needs a much greater governance structure surrounding its practitioners. And I can certainly say that it's on its way, but it needs to continue. If we look at the Medicine of Cycling group, this is a collective born out of a yearning for improvement in the profession. They released a consensus statement in 2013 where they sought to build consensus around what bike fitting actually is. And I'm not going to go through all of what they found, but I want to draw a reference to the two particular highlighted areas, and the first one being that of bike fitting categories. Consensus suggests that there was two types of bike fit. That of a neutral or optimum range fit related to the rider's cycling event, or that of an accommodated fit, compensating for the physical limitations of the rider or the bike. This is, in my mind, fitting the bike to the rider. So what does it look? What does a neutral, optimum range fit look like? Well, this is what happens when your athlete doesn't really perceive any limit to position. Rather the sole aim of position is to gain as greater an aerodynamic advantage as possible. This is Graham O'Brien again in the sort of Superman position on the left and the egg position on the right. So during the sort of battle for the hour record in the 1990s with Chris Boardman. But this is not most people. Most people can't adopt these positions and ride as hard as he did. And these positions also have been outlawed by the UCI. So where does the distinction lay? When do we accommodate, and when is fit optimum for function? This brings me to the fit window. And so the fit window is a term that's been used before. Phil Burt, GB cycling physio, in his book Bike Fit, very good book, uses this term. And unless I miss his intention, I believe he uses this term to express the fact that there maybe isn't one specific position that is perfect for each rider. Rather, this changes in time with fitness, cycling discipline, to name a number of factors. But in my practice, I've started to see this as a term to distinguish between those athletes that can be placed into an optimum position for their discipline, or where there needs to be some level of accommodation and potential subsequent rehabilitation. So some folk, feel that they have a huge panoramic window of fit, with great resilience. You could get them in any position you wished. And some folk really, they feel like they've got a very small sort of porthole as a window, and some people's window of fit sits outside of the bike that they currently have. So what affects the size of the window or the position that you're going to end up in? So this is the output of the 2013 consensus statement on bike fitting, and I've juggled them around to fit the square window. So we start at the top there. Obviously the goals of the cyclist, what the cyclist wants to achieve, that's going to affect fit. The experience of the cyclist is important, and the demands of the cycling discipline. So obviously a road position is going to be very different to a time trial, to a cyclocross position. We've also got the sort of physical aspects of the cyclist level of conditioning, the general health, injuries and surgeries in the past, and then what they term as anatomical constraints, so muscle and joint flexibility issues, strength, core stability, coordination and asymmetries. They also reference kit, the current bicycle and components, and if we take Filippo Garner again, if you've got access to a Pinarello Blide, Jim Radcliffe's wallet, a wind tunnel, and a 3D printer, your fit outcome is going to be very different to most. But as an MSK practitioner, I sort of ask myself, does this look like an exhaustive list of what needs to be covered in an MSK intervention? Is bike fitting MSK practice? So in my opinion, an accommodating fit related to symptoms of pain or discomfort or numbness should, in my book, be considered as such. We know from MSK practice that treating people as solely biomechanical problems is fraught with pitfalls. So this is the consensus statement, but I do feel that if we're really truly going to fit the bike to the whole rider, we need to think about things differently. So I'd like to add some further points to that consensus document, and in my mind it helps to sort of classify things a little bit. So they talked about some psychosocial issues, the sort of goals of the cyclist, and certainly I would suggest that goals are incredibly important in my view. A good goal-orientated fit is the route to a much less Marmite profession. If we can start the process of fit by really drilling into what would make the athlete happy, we've gone a long way already to getting a good outcome. Experience and skills is so important, and we'll come to this later. Understanding who your athlete is and what their belief structure is gives you a solid foundation to produce a negotiated fit. Transitioning position is absolutely dependent on the skill and experience of the cyclist. Without acknowledging this, you may well leave people in a position that they can't tolerate. So I also want to sort of tinker around the edges of some of the terminology relating to physical assessment. Core stability, I think rather than core stability, I think I'd like to think about the sort of functional outcome of that instead. Balance on the bike is important. Core stability maybe less so. Core stability in my mind just makes people do planks and transverse abdominis exercises. But having good balance, that means that you're stable through the corners and your hands don't go numb because you're not overloading them, or your neck doesn't hurt. I'd like to also add in endurance there. Endurance is absolutely paramount. Cycling is an endurance sport, and most of the factors that we're talking about here, they change with fatigue. So then, how does this sort of current sort of structural, biomechanical, pathoanatomical understanding of the bike rider interface compare with current contemporary MSK practice? And here we can jump onto the MSK Reform think tank and the Clinical Excellence Group, who were very clear in suggesting that clinical excellence is delivered by clinicians who value patient-centered care or holistic a biopsychosocial model. So I'd like to explore then, what fitting the whole rider may mean. And I think sometimes the pitfalls in the fitting process is in for example, in collecting goals and experience in a closed process. For example, my goal is I want my knee to not hurt. My experience is I've been riding 15 years and I'm an age group representative triathlete. It doesn't really tell you anything about that athlete or their belief structure. I think sometimes the issue with collecting predetermined information for a client, such as goals or asking the client their experience in years or their discipline, it can lead to the assumptions that about their requirements for the process. Understanding their narrative, however, is much less likely to lead to someone having a bike fit with an outcome that doesn't fit their requirements. lots of follow-up questions are needed. Why are your cleats set up in that way? How have we got this saddle to this position? What's behind your current position? The whole bike fitting process should add to the narrative in my mind. And all of this should inform a bespoke outcome. And I would say never assume that you know best what position the rider needs at that current time. So you may have a better understanding of what might produce more power, or what would get rid of that rider's foot or hand numbness, or however, exploring their sort of current position and what has brought them to there. Without doing that, you can't really say that you can give them a position they will tolerate. So you have to excuse me here. I'm going to go off on a bit of a bit off piste rather. And an example of a method in which you could achieve this type of questioning is using Socratic questioning. So this is a method that's been used extensively in the management of persistent pain. It's come from education, but why can't it be used in bike fitting? Socratic questioning is at the heart of critical thinking. It aims to challenge assumptions, identifies underpinning thoughts, discovers alternate viewpoints, and really helps the rider, helps people, but in our case the rider, move themselves towards their ultimate game. I cannot teach anybody anything, I can only make them think. Socratic questioning is based on the foundation that thinking has structured logic. People come to the position of thought based on assumptions. And Socratic questioning allows the underlying thoughts to be questioned. So like I say, bear with me on this, and I am going to give you some case studies to explore this in more detail. But really there are 6 different types of questioning seen within Socratic questioning. And they are getting clients to clarify their thinking and exploring the origin of their thoughts. Why do you think that? Challenging clients' assumptions, providing evidence as a basis for arguments. Why do you say that? Why is your saddle at that height? What's behind that? Okay, tell me what brought you to that decision. Discovering alternate viewpoints or perspectives and conflicts between contentions, and exploring implications and consequences, and then just questioning questions. Why do you think I'm asking you this question? I want to get to the bottom of something. What's the client's understanding of my intentions? So if it's all a bit confusing, we're going to put this in the context of some case studies now. So my first case study is that of a 40-year-old Category 1 racer, 20 years experience, really good cyclist, really good cyclist. 5 previous bike fits to try and sort out the same issue. And the issue was some right-sided saddle soreness. Multiple previous tweaks to position, with leg length shimming and cleat wedging. But if we look at him on the bike, his position was not bad, quite stable. His pedalling, however, he was leading with his heel quite strongly from the start of downstroke on the right hand side, and that he feels that this changed after sustaining a fractured left neck of femur. So I sort of went into this fit, probably, from probably maybe a more sort of humble position of thinking that actually if 5 previous fitters hadn't got to the bottom of this issue, maybe fit wasn't the only issue. But what we did do is try to understand the sort of narrative of where he's come to, and actually, we can see that this all changed. His pedalling changed during this, after this fractured left neck of femur, and the rider had sort of developed really quite maladaptive beliefs in relation to the alignment and healing of this left hip, and we were really able to sort of discuss those and sort of, he saw that this sort of changes for what they were, which was not really needed. So we sort of worked through ways in which it was okay to change out of his current pedalling position. We discussed transition out of his current pedalling style. He saw the reason for that, and he now rides without saddle soreness. Case study number 2. a 55-year-old, new to triathlon, been riding bikes her whole adult life, but for social and commuting purposes. She had one previous fit in the past, but found that she couldn't tolerate the position. The reason she was wanting a fit was she had lower back pain. She had a history of chronic mechanical low back pain, but this had never really before sort of affected her cycling. So when we looked at her, patient's saddle was just far too low. She was unstable at threshold power, so she had quite a lot of rocking in her pelvis, and this was really exacerbated on power transition. So when I pushed her to a higher power, this just got worse. Patient was essentially sat in a sustained lumbar flexion. So understanding the narrative here enabled me to understand that she was nervous using clipless pedals, but felt pressure to use them from a social group, and particularly because of the perceived added power they would bring. Due to sort of her nervousness on the road, she was setting her saddle really low so that she could touch the floor if she needed to while seated. She wanted a quick out if she needed to. She wanted to be able to get that foot on the floor. So we discussed the benefits of her pedals and the benefits related to saddle height. And I was explicit that I felt that the change in position from commuter to triathlon bike, in conjunction with her lower back pain, previous lower back pain, had just placed her saddle in a height that it was outside of her tolerable fit window. But then we negotiated a transition into a triathlon position. So this included a period of time on platform pedals, took away the thing that was really making her nervous. We phased raising of her saddle and a widening of her tri-bars. She felt more stable on the bike. We then discussed an arm's length phased approach to reinstating a better position. She was able to tolerate a pain-free position with a negotiated saddle height that was within her fit window. We worked with her anxieties, and she's now very much enjoying her triathlon. So, unlocking these cases, particularly that last one, had very little to do with any aspect of the medicine of cycling consensus. In both of these cases, there was real interplay between the rider's biology, psychology, and social interactions. Is this what the biopsychosocial model looks like when placed in the context of bike fitting? Understanding that sort of reciprocal interplay between biology, psychology, and the social aspects of an athlete. My feeling is that in the context of pain, it is just not acceptable to treat the athlete as a part of a biomechanical unit along with the bike. And I think that these case studies are really an example of that. So we come to our transitional agreements here now, and you can see particularly with that last patient, that last client, by understanding this lady's narrative, we could help her reach a better outcome. By understanding the lived experience of the situation, we could ensure that her position changes fit within the client's acceptable outcome. Without understanding this, you'll win some, but also you'll lose some, and worst of all, we won't really understand why we've lost, and we won't improve. And then by understanding the narrative, we can then help our clients reach a better outcome by moving them through their understanding towards, a better position. We can then start to use our knowledge of power production and aerodynamics and balance and stability to move their understanding. So what might the future of bike fitting look like in my mind? And I could have sat here and talked for half an hour about saddle height. There is developing evidence and consensus that saddle height is the most important factor when it comes to setting up a bike, and I certainly concur with that. Saddle height is king. However, this doesn't really sort of speak to my biases, and I don't really believe that if we could just develop an algorithm for setting the perfect saddle height, we would produce better outcomes. For me, a brighter future for bike fitting, less Marmite one, would include greater governance regarding training and accreditation, that's based solely on the knowledge and skills and attributes of that of the fitter. A consensus needs to be drawn up related to what good bike fitting includes, and this should, for me, include the plethora of research undertaken in the MSK sphere, particularly regarding communication. We should stop treating bike fitting as a solely biomechanical problem. And finally, I think a real focus on person-centered bike fitting, encapsulating the whole cyclist with an integration of the biopsychosocial approach would go a long way. Okay, thank you very much for listening.